Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom, assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio, continuing the journey and the fellowship that we have here. Right, and today I will be fellowshipping with a gentleman named Joseph Benton. He's quite involved in Odd Fellowship. He's also a fellow podcaster. Now, if you recall, in other segments of Points of Light Radio, we fellowshipped with members of the Independent Order of Odd Fellows, the Grand United Order of Odd Fellows, the Ancient Mystic Order of Samaritans, the Muscovites, the Encampment, the Patriarchs Milton. Did I miss any? But my guest today will be shedding light and discussing Odd Fellowship in general. He will be also introducing us to an Odd Fellowship order that is being resurrected. I will be covering them in a future segment of Points of Light Radio. So I'm not gonna, you got to keep watching if you want to learn about that, right? But Mr. Benton is past grand of his lodge. He's a past Chief Patriarch, a Chevalier. I'll have to ask him about what that is. He's a Rebekah. I've been wanting to interview the Rebekahs. He also has a podcast called The Oddcast. And as I said, I love interviewing fellow podcasters. So this is going to be a really good time. So I'm not going to do any more explaining here. I can't wait to get to this interview and have this conversation. So let's go talk and fellowship with Mr. Benton. As I always ask you, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Then you just trim your lamp and follow me. How you doing?
Good.
Good.
How are you doing?
Very good, thanks. Mr. Benton, and welcome to Points of Light Radio. Now, you are the past Grand and past Chief Patriarch, Chevalier, and a Rebekah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all?
Okay. Well, I live in Santa Barbara County in wine country, moved up from LA a long time ago. Before moving to LA, I was in the Marines for 8.5 years.
Hoorah.
Yeah. And let me see. Well, I'm from Ohio originally.
Okay.
My dad was in a lot of fraternities, like even though he wasn't really qualified. So like he was a member of like VFW and AMVETS and stuff, and he never served, which is pretty funny. He just had a good way of talking himself into joining clubs and stuff. So
Now, the one thing I'd like to know is, like, first of all, what is a Chevalier or Chevalier?
well, I don't know if you've heard of the Patriarchs Militant.
Yes, I have. I've covered them.
So the basic rank for the Patriarchs Militant is the Chevalier.
Okay. Okay. And, but now the Rebekahs, now I've been wanting to interview a member of the Rebekahs.
Mhm.
I always thought it was a ladies' organization, shall we say, or wasn't it originally set up as a ladies' organization?
Yes, it was. And two things about that are really interesting. At the time when it was formed, I want to say 1850 something, it was extremely progressive to allow women to basically form their own corporation because of, a lot of women didn't have rights to do basic things like that, form their own corporation. So they were allowed to do that. It was very progressive. But the other thing that I wanted to mention is that every Rebekah's Lodge had to have some kind of management by a regular odd fellow. So you had to have somebody who was an odd fellow associated with a Rebekah's Lodge.
Okay, so it wasn't necessarily in an all ladies lodge even back then, was it?
Well, it more or less was. It just needed oversight. It's like the women were empowered, but not completely
Yeah.
trusted.
Well, so what were your duties as a past grand?
Well, being a past grand means that I was the noble grand or leader or CEO of the lodge. And so my status after being a noble grand is a past grand. As a matter of fact, Rebekah's have a past noble grand title. So with regular Oddfellows, it's past grand. And by regular Oddfellows, I mean independent order of Oddfellows. Um, and let me see what else. So just in general, um, past grand doesn't really do much except they're involved in the degree work and they are looked upon for sage advice in lodge operations and the law of rules of odd fellowship.
So what's the chief patriarch now? Is that part of the patriarch's militant or the Rebekah's?
The chief patriarch is actually the head of an encampment.
Okay.
So encampments are um, not a part of the patriarch's militant.
No, I've
They're
covered
basic, yeah. So they're basically four different branches for adults, and the encampment is one of them. Rebekah's and patriarch's militants are the other two. So whenever you're the head of an encampment, you are the chief patriarch. And so I'm a past chief patriarch.
Okay. Now, tell us about the improved order of patriotic oddfellows. Now, I'll be covering more in the future, but I mean, the one thing I want to know is why do they use the term improved, shall we say?
The improved order of patriotic oddfellows is actually the resurrection of the original independent order of patriotic oddfellows. So they started back in the early 1900s, and they had degrees and everything, just like all the other oddfellows. There are at least a dozen different oddfellows groups. Not that they are in existence today, but there's this graphic from way back when where somebody showed all of the lineage of like all the different oddfellows groups that there were in England and how they spread into the United States and then from there spread out. So in the United States, we primarily have the Grand United Order of Oddfellows, which came from England. And we also have the Independent Order of Oddfellows, which came from England. And they were part of Manchester United. So it's improved because the people that started it back in early 1900s, 1904 or something, that's what they called it.
Now, the one thing I've been wondering about is why don't more people, shall we say, that are in the Oddfellows, why do they not join the encampment or the Patriarch's Militant or any of these other appendant, shall we say, bodies? Why do they not do that?
Well, I think that you're pointing at something that's just kind of a general problem for fraternities in general, and that is participation. So whenever you've got a lodge of over 100 people, like in my little town that I live in, it's like 30 years ago, there were like probably, I don't know, 1,000 or so people who were citizens of the little town that I live in. Now in the general area, it's over 50,000. But back then, when they had hundreds and maybe into maybe when they got near 1,000, they had over 150 men who were members of the Oddfellows. Wow. So by a percentage of the people who lived in the city, it was more than 1 out of 10. And this is back around 1930. Now, if you look at the population now, and you figure the same percentage, we should have at least 50 times the number of people that we do now. So, or of 150. So 50 times 150 would be what? 7,500 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's the popularity of Oddfellows itself has shrunk to a point where we no longer have 150 people, and we now have about 30. We just crossed 40 in our lodge. We've had a bit of a resurrection of membership. When I joined, we were just under 30, and now we're over 40, which is really great. But it's really because of participation that more people don't participate in the encampment and the Patriarch's Militant. Back when you had over 100 people in a single lodge, we had like Oddfellows bands. There, it was very common for you to have a band of people who were in your lodge. Not unlike how it is if you go to a church of over 150 people, you have a band.
Choir, yeah, or band, yeah.
Yeah, guitar and drums and, singing and all that stuff. That was what Oddfellows was more like. Of course, it was brass instead of electrified. But, just in terms of participation, when you had over 150 people, those 150 people in the lodge would be interested in being elevated above the regular meeting and being more involved in the actual politics of the lodge itself. And they would join an encampment hosted in the same lodge. So it's kind of like the cream of the crop would be in the encampment. And the same for Patriarch's Militant. Those people were the ones that were typically veterans. One of the great things about the Patriarch's Militant, which I don't know if you mentioned this in your, you talked about this before, but you can wear your military ribbons with the Patriarch's Militant uniform. So, and it's authorized, which is really pretty cool. Yeah. So you had that, number of people in a canton, which is the unit of a Patriarch's Militant. You had a canton and you had an encampment when you had enough people in your regular Oddfellows Lodge.
Okay, well, now that's one that you talk about the evolution of Odd Fellowship. Now, like you say, it has evolved and lodges now are mixed. Do you ever envision Odd Fellowship taking out its ritual and degree work like some of the other organizations have, like the Elks and stuff like that?
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that about the Elks, because the officers of the Elks, from what I understand, and I'm not an Elk and I'm not an officer of the Elks, but from what I understand, as a matter of fact, I just found a video of this on YouTube where they have a ritual and they go through, this entire ritual. And my understanding of it is that the people that are the governing body of an Elks Lodge, as a matter of fact, eyewitness account, somebody I know who's an Elk in town was talking about the ballot box. They ballot for people. I believe, and I know for a fact, that they do have a ritual, the Elks do, and it's probably something that only the officers ever get an opportunity to see.
Yeah, because as far as I know, they no longer have a initiatory first, second, third degree, things like that.
Right.
Do you ever see the Oddfellows doing the same thing, taking out their?
Do I see them doing that?
Yeah.
No, I don't see them. I don't see them doing that. And I think that there are a number of things that would be really great for them to do. And there's other Oddfellows who are past grandmasters who have mentioned this. And I think that it would really be a smart thing to do. And that is that instead of having your regular Oddfellows and Rebekah's meeting on a different night, and instead of having your encampment meet on a different night and your canton meeting on a different night, you would have everybody open on the same night, and you would do the ritual as it applies to each of those roles, so that whenever you open the lodge, it's open in all the degrees. And that way people don't have to have separate meetings. I don't know if that's really the better way of doing it. I think it would be useful in some situations.
Efficient.
Yeah, in some situations, yeah. Frankly, I came up with this idea the other day, and I thought it was pretty cool. Um, why don't we actually have something a little more like the Elks, where the people that are running the lodge are the ones that do the ritual, and everybody else, whenever we get together, we just do something social because we're a member benefit society by law. The lodge is supposed to provide for some kind of benefits. And some lodges that I belong to, they pay for dinners, they pay for entertainment, they pay for trips to Disneyland. You know, if you belong to a member benefit society, you should get some kind of a benefit. Who says that everybody has to attend a ritual meeting? I don't think it's really necessary. I think as long as someone is doing it, then that's good. But I'm gonna actually talk with some of the members of my lodge and see if they might be interested in doing it that way. Because if the people who didn't want the ritual met socially and had a good time together on the dime of the lodge, they'd get more out of it. A lot of people just don't care for the ritual. But here's the great thing: the people who do like the ritual, they can always come and be there for the ritual part. The officers would have to do the ritual. Doesn't mean everybody has to come, but the people that enjoy the ritual and the people that are required to do the ritual, the officers, I think it'd be a neat idea to have separate nights. One is a ritual night, and one is just for social. We're sort of doing that now twice.
How is the ritual, by the way, if you don't mind me asking? How do you find
How is it?
No, but I'm finding, like, for some of the lodges I belong to, a lot of people would rather just read through the ritual because like the memory, where if you're like me, I've got a memory like a sieve. So remembering all the rituals, remembering the steps, all of that kind of thing. Some of it I'm a little foggy on even. You know what I mean? You find a lot of people can remember the ritual and remember.
No, there's nobody I know of that actually knows the entire ritual of the lodge.
Yeah.
The red book, now, as far as the degree work goes, it used to be a requirement that you remember it word for word, and that was the things that were in a cipher. So the cipher part was something that you're expected to have committed to memory, and as a matter of fact, it is written in our laws that you have to have it. If you are going to be an officer, you have to have it committed to memory word for word. And you're supposed to be tested in front of your lodge, open in the third degree, to do that. And that's in our rules. Is it enforced? No, it's not enforced, at least not that I've ever seen. Are there some old timers that insist on it? Yeah. But you know what? I have found out that there are some old timers that insist that they don't use the ritual, which is the opposite of what I've been told.
In some of the outfits I belong to, the orders I belong to, I have found, for instance, first degree, because you do most of your business in first degree. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that. But then even some of the old timers have issues with second, third degree, and so on. Because you very rarely, if ever, go through those kinds of degrees. You really don't. And if unless someone's getting it, you're not going to,
Yeah. No, I totally get it. It's like, if you did it all the time, you'd remember it, and then there would be some people who could remember it more easily. They would probably be doing it more often than everybody else. And then, you've got a situation where if it was over 150 people, you would have certain people that you would turn to do those things. And then if you wanted to be the leader, you would have to, step up your game and get things more committed to memory. But what I have found, though, is that people who really are interested in the ritual, the way that it's supposed to be done the right way, and they don't mind knowing their role. That doesn't necessarily mean practicing it, but just like when they're doing it, they really pay attention, try to remember what it is that's going on and understand. It's much better for everybody. Everything goes quicker. You don't spend all this time going, oh yeah, what are we doing now? So it's a lot more better experience for people.
Now tell us about the Three Links podcast. I've wanted to.
Well, I don't know about the Three Links podcast actually, because I'm not a part of that one. But I can tell you that I know the people who are involved in the Three Links podcast. They're great guys. They're really, I love what they do. They're fantastic. I do something called the Oddcast.
Yeah. Tell us about
So
that.
that's my podcast. So yeah, I started. I was the first one, and it was disputed by somebody. I was the first one to actually put together a video podcast, and it just so happened that there was someone else who started one up almost when I did, but I beat them to the punch. I had no idea that they were doing it. They had no idea I was doing it. But it was just when COVID started. And so I started doing a video podcast, and I also put it out on regular podcast, for audio. Unfortunately, it's not available right now. I stopped paying my bills. I've taken a break, from doing that. But the YouTube videos are still out there.
There.
And so if you go to oddcast.net, you can go and click on the YouTube videos, and I've done a lot of really great interviews with people. I think you mentioned that you did go and check it out. I've interviewed historians talking about Oddfellows and where it came from, and the different societal impacts that Oddfellows have had on society in general, and also some very interesting stories about Oddfellows, like Charlie Parkhurst. Charlie Parkhurst was a member of a lodge up the coast near Santa Cruz in California. And when Charlie Parkhurst died, they found out that Charlie Parkhurst was biologically a woman. Although Charlie Parkhurst was known to drink and get rowdy and fight, and was a stagecoach driver, and was one of the best in the business. And to the stories about Charlie Parkhurst were amazing. Charlie fought off some not bank robbers, stagecoach robbers, and shot one of them. So Charlie Parkhurst was a very rough and tumble character. Just so happened that whenever Charlie Parkhurst died, the doctor who was examining Charlie's body discovered something. I did a whole podcast about it. It's a very fascinating story. And Charlie was the first, if you consider Charlie to be a female, because Charlie lived as a man. Nobody, knew that Charlie was not a man biologically. I don't want to get political about it, but Charlie was a guy. That's how Charlie lived. So Charlie was the first person who biologically was a woman who registered to vote in the United States.
But that's one thing I've asked numerous times though on my podcast, and maybe you could
Sure.
Throw your opinion on this though. We all understand that the men who signed the Declaration of Independence, all these different documents down there, the Constitution, there's that big thing about, they were Masons.
Yes.
And I've asked this numerous times during the course of my podcast, where I'll be mentioning that this president, for instance, was a Freemason, but he was also an elk, or he was also a moose. How come we remember that these guys were Masons, but a lot of them were Oddfellows? A lot of them were belonged to various different fraternal organizations, Eagles, and so on. Why is it that never pops up, but this Masonic thing does constantly?
Well, the reason why, if you ask me, is because there are lots of movies that are made about the Masons that are mysterious and intriguing, pretty much because of the things that you're talking about. There was no fraternal organization that had as many members involved in the founding of the United States. It's just a fact. The Masons have been around longer, to my knowledge, because we don't really know for sure. But I would say I think a pretty educated guess would be that since so many people who founded the country, our founding fathers, were Masons, that they were, far more active than anybody really knew. I mean, look, recently I discovered how it is that in Scotland, their revolution that they tried to return the Bonnie Prince to the throne and all this stuff. there were Masons that were involved in that intrigue. And so the Masons have played a role in a lot of different, very large, influential events in history in Europe. And so it's not a big surprise that they had something to do. And I don't mean it's the Masons, like the organization of the Masons didn't tell these guys to do these things, but they just so happened to have this sort of back channel that allowed them to organize and coordinate that wasn't publicly accessible. And, hey, all more power to
knowledge, has there ever been a president that's been an Oddfellow? I know our first prime minister was. He was a Mason, an Oddfellow, and an Orangeman.
Let me see here. I can look it up here real quick because on my website for our lodge, I actually put some of the famous people who were Oddfellows. And there's actually a lot of people that say that certain people were Oddfellows and they're not. So I can get into that if you want. But let's see here. Ulysses S. Grant was an Oddfellow. Rutherford Hayes was an Oddfellow. William McKinley was an Oddfellow. Franklin Roosevelt was an Oddfellow.
He was also an Elkin, I think, or something like that.
Yeah. Only three-term president, by the way, in history. And so there you go. And
like I said, our first prime minister was, but we don't have that intrigue up here that says, like a lot of the men around the table. If you look at what they call the Charlottetown Conference, where they signed where they came upon the agreement for Confederation here in Canada, a lot of them were, like our first prime minister was a Freemason, an Oddfellow, and an Orangeman. A lot of them belonged to a lot of those men around that table, but we don't have that level of intrigue surrounding it. But to be fair, it wasn't just about influence. A lot of it was, like I keep saying, a lot of it was the fact that if in those days, if you needed help in any way, or you just needed fellowship, you wanted to socialize, you went to your family, your lodge, or your church. Those were the three things you went to. I mean, an Oddfellow or a Masonic lodge or an Orange lodge was a place where someone might go for a bridge game or for a dance or things like that. Those
absolutely.
Now, of course, and like I keep saying, with various different forms of entertainment in the social welfare state, we don't do that. We don't go to those places anymore, for better or for worse, like I said.
Well, there is one thing that I don't think should be discounted with regards to what it is that we're talking about. And that is that people who join the Oddfellows, they join the Masons, they join a fraternity. And, it could be Rotary, it doesn't really matter. Some kind of social organization. And you become the leader of your lodge or your unit or whatever club, chapter, you become the leader. You become somebody who actually has grown in terms of your leadership ability.
I agree.
And whenever you are in Oddfellows or some other fraternity, and you go and you do something at the state level or the higher jurisdiction level, et cetera, you're now rubbing shoulders with other people who are just like you, who rose to a particular rank and learned and grew in your leadership skills. And then you do things together at a bigger scale. Well, what is there after that? It's basically, government. If you want to amp that up a bit further, government, becoming a president, becoming a state senator, that's an obvious next step, especially we're talking about 1800s, early 1900s, not like it is today, but back then, nowadays it's like if you're a lawyer, that's what you need to do. You need to actually be a lawyer before you can really be a lawmaker. But it used to be that you were a good orator. You could get out in front of a crowd and work the crowd. And that's how people, had the candidates did these whistle stop tours. They'd pull into a small town on the back of a train and they would give a speech and then they would go off to the next town. And that's because they were really good at talking in front of crowds because they developed that in the lodge.
Yeah. And people were things were more spread out back then. I think you'll agree.
Oh yeah,
And the fact is, you knew people from your church or from your lodge. Those were quite naturally the people that you'd probably vote for. I mean, before,
sure.
and things like that. You got to know them that way, or the next town over, you'd say to the people in that lodge or that church, I think he's a good guy. He's in my lodge or my church, or both in many cases.
Hmm. Hmm.
First of all, what drew you to Odd Fellowship, though? Moving on.
Oh, well, in the middle of our town, of the small town that I live in, there's an Oddfellows Lodge, and the sign, it was a neon sign that stuck out from the front of the building, and this building is right in the middle of our downtown. It's at the cross section or cross the intersection of the middle of our town, Old Town, and I was just very kind of curious about it, and when I found out what it was, I looked up Oddfellows. I was like, you know what, um, you know, in this town, and this town is known for this. If you're not from here, it's hard to get to know people. It's hard for people to know you as anything other than, oh, they're not from here. And I don't mean to say that like it's something bad about it, but it's very unlike Los Angeles,
Mhm.
and so we came here from Los Angeles because we had a brand new daughter and we wanted to raise her in a better environment. So we picked this little town, and it was hard for us to get to know people because it's not like people were, super friendly in that regard, getting to know people. We met a few people, but just seemed odd that we just didn't really, get to know a lot of people. So whenever I found out about it, I was like, oh, they allow women. Oh, this means maybe my wife and I can join. And so I contacted them and left a message on their voicemail, and they got a hold of me, and I joined, and that's how I started my journey. I think I had heard of Oddfellows at some point in my life, but I had heard of Masons far more.
Mhm. Now, what has it done for you, though? The Oddfellows. What do you think it's done for you through your trip? What did you learn about yourself, shall we say, on your trip
Well,
through
geez.
fraternal journey?
Uh, well, I think that's a really good question. I think that the thing that I learned was a few things about leadership, just in terms of presiding over a meeting. That was a skill that I had not developed, but I did quite well with it as the Noble Grand. At least I think I was very happy with how I was able to bring a sense of humor to the lodge sessions, even though there were times whenever people would disagree about things. And I think being able to bring a little humor to it is more in touch with a natural way of doing things. But as far as what I've learned for myself goes, I've gotten a lot of friends out of it, and I've gotten to know a lot of more people in our town because of it, which is what I had signed up for. So what I signed up for was getting to know people more, and one of the things that I got out of it that I wasn't expecting was some things about leadership. And in the Marines and the military, you are often called upon to be a leader for different reasons, usually out of necessity. But this was something that was entirely not out of necessity, and it was just a matter of choosing and fulfilling on it. So it was a very
Sorry, but the
different.
degree work. I think you'll agree with me, and I'm going to cover this later in another segment of Points of Light
Sure.
Radio, but I think you agree with me that the degree work, a good degree work, and I'm sure you have these in Odd Fellowship. Not only do a you get a secret, and not only does that degree prepare you for the next degree, you get a lesson, and it's a lesson in many cases for life, like not just for the lodge, but you can apply it to your life. Would you not agree?
Well, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, look, Oddfellows says that all, really useful knowledge comes out of the Bible. Well, is the Bible useful for lessons in life? Yeah, sure. So, was it something that I had never heard before? In the way that it was presented was different for sure. A couple things were new. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if you're very familiar with Stoicism, but you should check out. There's a really great thing called the Daily Stoic,
Okay.
and there's a lot of Stoicism in Oddfellows.
Okay.
And I think that there's a lot of Stoicism in Masonry. And it's like, if you ever heard the term memento mori,
Yes.
that is one of the key parts of Stoicism, is to remember we're all going to die. Nobody's going to get out alive. So you might as well make it count. So that sort of thinking of like, how am I going to live out my limited number of days and bring value to not just myself, but to other people? What kind of a mark am I going to leave? What's my legacy? So Oddfellows has kind of a tinge of that. And I think that that's a really great thing. Some of our emblems, skull and crossbones, that's memento mori, It's like we remember our mortality. So there's a combination of what's in the Bible, which is a source of all, knowledge that the Oddfellows brings. But there is this definite element of Stoicism that's there, which I really appreciate. And so there you go. And as far as the improved order of patriotic Oddfellows, their initiatory degree, their lodge work is pretty different. And you can look it up on the web. You can actually download their book. That's how we ended up getting it. But it's a different approach. It's a bit more Masonic than it is Oddfellows, to be frank.
Okay, this is good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to be covering that in another podcast, and I definitely want to have you back here. I do appreciate your time tonight. We're running out of time here. I only have so much time on these Zoom calls,
Sure.
but yes, I appreciate, and you're always welcome back. I do want to have you back. I love talking to you here, by the way. I think it was just wonderful.
Thanks.
I think we've made a friend here tonight, and all the very best to you, your lodge, and to your podcast. You put that Oddcast back on there, sir.
Yeah, I will. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.
That was Joseph Benton, brothers and sisters, shedding some light on Odd Fellowship, as well as some other topics. Forgive me if I refer to my notes here. The first things that I gleaned were he joined to get to know his community, to get to know members of his community, to meet people. And I think that is one of the big reasons why people join fraternalism and are part of fraternalism. But I love the fact that for the second time in a little over a month, you've heard someone say, I moved to a new community and wanted to get to know people in it and wanted to give back to the community as well. Here he joined. I think that's wonderful. So you're seeing other reasons. Like I've often said, in my inaugural segment of Points of Light Radio, you heard me ask that. Why do they join? Well, here's one of the many reasons why people join. Right? He talked about how he felt that some of the memory work, some of the ritual has to involve. You've heard me spend a lot of time talking about ritual lately, because I have heard that some of the organizations have removed their ritual from their organizations. I personally think that's a mistake, but he thinks that they should evolve some of the ritual, keep it in place, but just evolve it. Right? Something to think about. Those of you who are in the Odd Fellows, something you should think about, right? As well as, I love the fact that, I keep mentioning this. We know so much about the presidents that were involved in Freemasonry, but we never talk about the presidents who were involved in other things. And you've heard me ask that here. Why? Well, here you have it. Four presidents. Rutherford B. Hayes, Ulysses S. Grant, President McKinley, President Franklin Roosevelt were all involved in the Odd Fellows. Right? That's I mean, I think that's amazing. Yet we don't see any conspiracy there. I think that's quite interesting, right? It is also great to see that, as I keep saying, Odd Fellowship is growing. And last of all, he shed a tiny bit of light on the improved order of patriotic Oddfellows, right? Now, I didn't know they existed until recently, and like I keep saying, we will be covering that very shortly in another segment of Points of Light Radio, right? I didn't want to go too far into that, but I think that's wonderful, okay? That not only is Odd Fellowship enjoying a bit of a resurgence, but some defunct orders are being, shall we say, resurrected. I think that's wonderful, right? And I love interviewing podcasters here on Points of Light Radio. I really do. That's great. I keep saying this. I'd love to, and I will have Mr. Benton back here on Points of Light Radio. But that's all I have time for today. So before I go, as usual, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. And I also welcome your comments and input. I do want to see more comments and input. Right? You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, it's been an honor and a pleasure fellowshipping with you and my guests today. I'm always sorry to part with you, but until we meet again, just step into the light.